Let's bring in NBC senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, there is so much to break down here, but something I think we should talk about a little bit more were the president's own comments about that so-called anti-weaponization fund and what the implications of that could mean for his acting Attorney General Todd Blanche that was sitting there in the room with him.
Yeah, that's right, Monica. And look, the president was pressed on this. He was asked point blank, is the anti-weaponization fund dead? And he said it is dead, but that he wishes it weren't. And then he tried to argue for why he thought it was a good idea, an argument he made before, that people that feel that they had been targeted by the Justice Department under President Biden should be compensated, he feels, even saying that he could potentially be covered under that fund, although he doesn't want that particular money. And then he went and he slammed John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, of course, who lost his primary after President Trump endorsed his Republican primary opponent. The president giving Cornyn basically saying that he understands why he would be upset given the president endorsed his opponent, but that it's unfortunate, essentially. Now, Cornyn, for his part, has argued that no, he is not bitter because the president endorsed his opponent. That's not why he's doing this, but that he and Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, along with other Republicans privately, have significant concerns about the settlement that President Trump had struck with in that case involving the IRS, that according to that settlement, his family would have been exempt from any future audits, as well as creating this $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund. But the news there is the president saying that it is dead, although he wishes it weren't, and it's that caveat that is exactly why Senator John Cornyn and Senator Tillis have wanted to get this in writing to prevent this anti-weaponization fund from being revived. Now, the president yesterday on social media had posted that he'd be okay with withdrawing the nomination and let Todd Blanche stay in there in an acting role. However, this morning he reversed that very suddenly and said that Congress, that the Senate should confirm Todd Blanche immediately. Still a lot of questions about whether that is going to happen in the next couple of days, because the Senate leaves for its August recess at the end of next week, Monica.
Yeah, Gabe, and just to drill down on that point a little bit, the president also said that he felt that the fund wouldn't have covered him or his family, but that is at the crux of all of this. So just talk a little bit more about that and some of the concerns that Republican senators have been really amplifying in recent days. And to your point, it's exactly those kinds of comments that want them to have. They would say they want more reassurances about that. But is your sense here now that the White House is ready to walk away from that? And what should we make of Senator Tillis's own comment earlier today, blaming what he called an incompetent personal advisor? Those were his words to the president, that was the one standing in the way of this.
Well, certainly, look, Senator Tillis has repeatedly used that argument that it is the president getting bad advice from his top advisors, whether that be Stephen Miller when it comes to immigration, or when it comes to other top officials when it comes to other subjects. And he tries to kind of walk that fine line with his Republican supporters in North Carolina, saying that he might not necessarily disagree with the president directly, but he's getting bad advice. And that's something that we see there from Thom Tillis when it comes to the so-called anti-weaponization fund. But we'll say, Monica, this fund, you're right, it isn't just Tillis or Cornyn that have had reservations about it, because it is using taxpayer money, in theory, to pay out sums of money to what could be considered by critics the president's political allies. And that's not something that Republicans want to be talking about during this midterm election campaign over the coming months. Now, during Todd Blanche's confirmation hearings, there was some sharp back and forth about whether this fund was in fact dead, or whether, because this is part of a legal arrangement, by not getting it in writing, that this won't be brought up again. That's fueling the skepticism here on the part of Senator Cornyn, who is, the president and some, White House officials may be looking at this and saying, look, he's trying to be relevant. He's trying to use his newfound leverage here, given the fact that he's a lame duck senator at this point, and perhaps doing this purposefully to retaliate against the president. For his part, Senator Corden is strongly denying that and saying that this is a principled stance, that taxpayer money should not be used to potentially compensate people who were convicted of beating police officers on January 6th, Monica.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.